Hello, everybody. It's Mrs. Rosado here to begin reading a chapter book. So I'm going to be reading a little bit each day. My hope is 1 to 2 chapters a day. This is a book that we started. We only got to the first chapter. So I'm going to reread the first chapter in case anyone else is listening and wants to join in with us. We will have questions after each chapter that you can just tell a friend, a family member that's with you, or you can write down on a piece of paper, which would be really great. So the story I'm going to read is called Midnight for Charlie Bone. And that's why I picked this background today, because he's kind of magical, and I thought this was a nice background for that. The story was written by the author. Her name is Jenny Nimmo, and this book was published, let me make sure I get this right, by Orchard Books. So this is the book I'm going to read. It was actually from Cleveland Library. The two questions that I want you to think about as I'm reading the first chapter are, what are some of Charlie's character traits? So character traits mean, who is he as a character? What kind of person is he on the inside? Not what does he look like, but what are some of his thoughts and actions in the chapter? Because looking at a character's thoughts and actions can help us think about what kind of person or character they are. So since he is the main character, I want you to be thinking about some of his character traits as we read. Another question or task that you can do after reading this chapter is to compare Charlie's grandmothers. So we're going to be reading about Charlie's two grandmothers that live with him, and I want you to think about, how are they alike and how are they different? Because when we compare, we talk about what's alike and different. You could do this by using a Venn diagram if you want. That is one good way to compare things. So that would be two circles like this. You would put one grandmother's name here, the other grandmother's name here. You can talk about some things that just the one grandmother does, some things that just the other grandmother does, and in the middle, that's where you're going to say what both grandmothers have in common. So that's a really good way to compare characters. Another thing you can do, very simple, is just create a T-chart. You can put one grandmother here, the other grandmother here, and just go back and forth, writing down some things that you found out about both of those grandmothers to be able to compare them. So now I'm going to start reading. Midnight for Charlie Bone. Another thing you can do while I'm reading, if you want, is color a picture. You can color a picture about the characters I'm reading, or just color and just kind of relax and chill out. A lot of students in my class like to lay down on the carpet while I'm reading. The first chapter is called Charlie Hears Voices. On a Thursday afternoon, just after tea, Charlie Bone saw smoke. He happened to be looking out of his window when a dark cloud lifted above the autumn trees. The wind blew it south and moved it through the sky like a great floating whale. Somewhere on the other side of the city, there was a fire. Charlie could hear a fire engine racing toward it. He had no idea that in mysterious and unexpected ways, he was connected to it and would soon be drawn to the place where it had begun. Charlie slept well, got up the next morning, and went to school. After school, Charlie and his friend, Benjamin Brown, walked home together as usual. The cloud of smoke had gone, but the sky was stormy and dark. A fierce wind sent red and gold leaves racing down Filbert Street. So if you're drawing a picture now, I might be drawing what the sky looks like at this time. The author's really helping us describe it. The sky was stormy and dark. A fierce wind was sending red and gold leaves racing down the street. Benjamin crossed the road of number 12, while Charlie stopped at number 9. Most of the people who lived at number 9 complained about the large chestnut tree in front of it, how dark it made their rooms, how damp and creaky it was, and how it would probably fall on the roof one day and kill them all in their beds. Needless to say, no one at number 9 did anything about it. Complaining to one another was as far as they went. They were that sort of family. or rather those sorts of families. And again, if you're drawing that picture, not only do you have that dark sky and the wind blowing leaves all around, but you might want to add in front of Charlie's house, number 9, this large chestnut tree that makes their rooms dark and it creaks and they're afraid it might fall on their roof one day. Must be a big tree. As Charlie ran up the stairs to his front door, the tree sighed and rained a handful of chestnuts on his head. Luckily, his thick, wiry hair softened the blows. Thick hair had its uses, though not many. Charlie was always being told to smarten himself up, an impossible task for someone with hair like a hedge. "Hello, grandmas," Charlie called as he stepped into the hall. There were 2 grandmas at number 9. Grandma Jones was Charlie's mother's mother, and Grandma Bone was Charlie's father's mother. Grandma Jones was round and cheerful and bossy, while Grandma Bone spoke only to complain. She rarely smiled, and nothing made her laugh. Her hair was thick and white, and she wore long, stiff dresses in shades of black, gray, or brown, never pink, which was Maisie's favorite color. Grandma Jones liked to be called Maisie, but Charlie wouldn't have dared to call Grandma Bone by her first name, which was Griselda. She liked to remind people that before she had married Mr. Bone, she had been a U-beam. The U-beams were an ancient family, their history littered with artistic people and others who had more unusual talents, such as hypnotism, mind-dreading, and bewitchery. Charlie knew he had disappointed Grandma Bone by being ordinary. Even worse, in her eyes, he was quite happy to be ordinary. When Charlie came home from school, it was always Maisie who gave him a wet kiss on the cheek and pushed something to eat under his nose. Today, Maisie had a large bump on her forehead. "Silly chestnut," she told Charlie. Grandma Bones was always sitting in a rocker by the stove, criticizing Maisie's cooking or the state of Charlie's hair. Today, the rocker was empty. That was the first unusual thing. I'm going to stop at this part of the text. This is called foreshadowing. It's a part in the text where the author lets you know that something different is going to be happening. And in this text specifically, they said today the rocker, like a rocking chair, was empty, and that was unusual, meaning someone was usually sitting in it. So the fact that this was a difference today means that something probably different will happen. It was Benjamin's 10th birthday on Saturday, and Charlie had decided to make him a birthday card instead of buying one. He had taken a photo of Benjamin's dog, Runner Bean, smiling, or, to be more precise, showing his long, incredibly yellow teeth. Charlie had asked his mother to get the photo enlarged at Quick Photo on her way home from work. He intended to draw a balloon saying "Happy Birthday, Benjamin" above Runner Bean's head. The second unusual thing was about to happen. At 5 minutes past 4, Charlie's mother came in with a box of overripe apples and rhubarb. "They'll make a lovely cobbler," she said, dumping the box beside Charlie's plate and kissing his shaggy head. Amy Bone worked part-time in greengrocer's shop, so there was always plenty of fruit and vegetables at number 9. Charlie leaned away from the rotting fruit. "Have you got my photo, Mom?" he asked. Amy Bone poked around in her shopping bag and found a large orange envelope. She put it on the other side of Charlie's plate. Charlie opened the envelope and revealed not Runner Bean. Nothing like Runner Bean. That's the dog, remember. It was at this moment that Grandma Bone appeared. She hovered in the doorway, fingering her neck, touching her silver white hair, and pulling at her stiff black shirt. She looked somehow as though she were on the brink of fulfilling her destiny. And in a way she was, though. At 65, you could be forgiven for thinking it was a bit late. The photograph that Charlie now held showed a man holding a baby. The man sat on an upright chair. He had a thinning grayish hair and a long, mournful face. Mournful. Mourn, to mourn something. Very sad-looking face. His crumpled suit was black, and his thick pebble glasses gave his pale gray eyes a lost, marble-like stare. So again, the author's doing a great job at describing the man in the picture here. He's holding a baby. He's sitting in an upright chair with thinning grayish hair, a mournful, sad-looking face, a crumpled suit, and glasses with pale gray eyes. If you're drawing a picture, you might want to draw him. Instead of pushing the photograph back into the envelope, Charlie continued to gaze at it. In fact, he couldn't tear his eyes away from it. He began to feel dizzy, and his ears were filled with mysterious sounds, like the hiss and swoosh of voices on the radio when you can't pinpoint the right frequency. "Oh," he said. What?" His own voice seemed far away, trapped behind a kind of fog. "What's wrong, Charlie?" asked his mother. "Is something happening?" Grandma Bone crept forward. "Aunt Astacia rang me. She had one of her premonitions." "Are you a proper U-beam after all?" Maisie glared at Grandma Bone while Charlie pulled his ears and shook his head. If only the horrible muffled buzzing would stop. He had to shout in order to hear himself. "They've made a mistake at the shop. Where's Runnerbean?" "There's no need to shout, Charlie," his mother looked over his shoulder. "My goodness, that's certainly not a dog." "Ow!" wailed Charlie, but suddenly the mumbling voices broke free of the buzz and made themselves clear. First came a woman's voice, soft and unfamiliar. "I wish you wouldn't do this, Mostyn." "Her mother's gone. I don't have a choice." The voice was definitely male. "Of course you do. Will you take her then?" said the man's voice. "You know I can't," replied the woman. Charlie looked at his mother. "Who said that?" She looked puzzled. "Who said what, Charlie?" Maisie giggled. "Oh, is a man in here?" he asked. Maisie giggled. "Only you, Charlie." Charlie felt claw-like fingers sinking into his shoulders. Grandma Bone leaned over him. "Tell me what you heard," she demanded. "Voices," said Charlie. "I know it sounds silly, but they seem to be coming from this photograph." Grandma Bone nodded. "What do they say?" "For goodness sake, Grandma Bone, don't be ridiculous," said Maisie. Grandma Bone gave Maisie a withering look. "I am not being ridiculous." Charlie noticed that his mother had gone very quiet. She pulled out a chair and sat down, looking pale and anxious. Maisie began to bang pans about, muttering, "You shouldn't encourage it. It's all garbage. I won't have it." "Shh," hissed Charlie. He could hear the baby crying. "You know, the one in the photograph?" The strange woman spoke again. "You've upset her. Look at the camera, Mostyn, and please try to smile. You look so gloomy." "What do you expect?" said the man. A camera shuttered clicked. "There, shall I take another?" "Do what you want. You'll thank me one day," said the woman behind the camera. "If you really intend to go through with this, it's the only thing you'll have to remember her by." Charlie noticed that a cat peeked out from behind the man's chair. It was an extraordinary color, deep copper, like a flame. From far away, Charlie heard his mother's voice. "Shall I take the photo back, Charlie?" "No," muttered Charlie, "not yet." But it seemed that the photograph had nothing more to say. The baby fussed for a moment and then was quiet. The gloomy man stared silently at the camera. And the cat? Was that a purr? Maisie was making such a noise with the pots and pans it was difficult to hear anything else. "Hush!" commanded Grandma Bone. "Charlie can't hear." "It's all nonsense," grumbled Maisie. "I don't know how you can just sit there, Amy, and let your crazy mother-in-law get away with it. Poor Charlie. He's just a boy. He's got nothing to do with those silly U-beams." "He's got their blood," said Charlie's mother quietly. "You can't get away from that." Maisie couldn't. She closed her mouth in a tight little line. Charlie was very bewildered. In the morning, he had been an ordinary boy. He hadn't been touched by a magic wand or banged his head. He hadn't had an electric shock or fallen off a bus, or as far as he knew, eaten a poisoned apple. And yet here he was, hearing voices from a piece of photographic paper. To set his mother's mind at rest, Charlie said, "I don't think it was anything, really. I just imagined it." Grandma Bone leaned even closer and breathed into his ear. "Listen, tonight things work better after midnight." He'll be asleep by then, I'll have you know, said Maisie, who had her ears as sharp as rabbits. It's all garbage. Ha, retorted Grandma Bone. Just you wait. She walked away, leaving a scent of mothballs and mint drifting around the kitchen. I didn't hear anything, Charlie said when she was gone. Are you sure? His mother asked anxiously. Honest, I was just doing it to tease Grandma Bone. He was trying to convince himself as well as his mother. Charlie, you're a wicked boy, Maisie said happily as she banged a meat cleaver into a meaty bone. Charlie's mother looked relieved and opened the evening paper. Charlie slipped the photograph back into its envelope. He felt exhausted. Perhaps a bit of TV would help him to relax. But before he could escape, the doorbell rang, and Grandma Bone could be heard saying, It's Benjamin Brown, isn't it? Charlie's in the kitchen, and you can leave that mangy baked bean outside. It's Runner, not baked, said Benjamin's voice, and I can't leave him outside. It's raining. Dogs like the rain, said Grandma Bone. Benjamin and his dog appeared in the kitchen. Benjamin was a small, pale-faced boy with hair the color of damp hay. Runner Bean was large, long-nosed dog with hair the color of damp hay. For some reason, Benjamin was always being picked on by other boys. People stole things from him, tripped him, and laughed at him. Charlie tried to help his friend, but sometimes Benjamin was beyond help. Sometimes, in fact, Charlie thought that Benjamin didn't even notice he was a victim. He lived in a world of his own. Runner Bean, smelling the meaty bone, rushed straight to Maisie and began to lick her ankles. Get off me, she yelled, swiping him on the nose. You're coming to my party, aren't you? Benjamin asked Charlie. Of course I am, said Charlie, immediately feeling guilty about the birthday card. So again, here you might want to think about what kind of person Charlie is, to go out of his way to make this special birthday card for his friend, and now he's feeling guilty and bad because the birthday card isn't what it was supposed to be. That tells us about who he is as a character. Good, because I'm getting a game that needs 2 people to play it. Charlie realized that no one else would be at Benjamin's party. This made him feel even more guilty. Runner Bean began to whine, almost as if he guessed that he wouldn't be appearing on Benjamin's birthday card. I'll be there, said Charlie cheerfully. He hadn't bought a present yet. He would have rushed out to the store before he began his quest.
My petty pink ward.
That's Isabel. I guess she wants to read a story too. Can you wait till Mommy's done, okay? And then you can read. Want to come for a walk with Runner? Benjamin asked hopefully. Okay. Maisie shouted something about supper as Charlie and Benjamin left the house, but the wind howled around their heads and a clap of thunder drowned her words. Runner Bean yelped as a chestnut hit his nose, and Benjamin managed to smile at last.
Not mine. I feel bad.
As the 2 boys and the dog ran into the wind, leaves flew in their faces and stuck to fur and clothes. He hadn't heard voices at all. It was just some silly nonsense that he made himself believe. And Grandma Bone had encouraged him just to annoy Maisie and upset his mother. Yes, Charlie cried happily. It's all garbage. I think Charlie's trying to convince himself that he didn't hear the voices, but I think he probably did. And leave, said Benjamin, who thought Charlie meant the litter being blown down the street. And leave, sang Charlie. He saw a newspaper flying toward him and stuck his foot out to catch it. But the paper lifted in a sudden gust and wrapped itself around his waist. As he pulled it away from him, a picture on the front page caught his eye. A mean-looking boy stood on the steps of a gray building. He had a long, narrow face, and wispy mustache grew above his thin upper lip. His dark hair, parted in the center, had been drawn back into a ponytail. So again, he's looking at the newspaper picture. So he's looking at another photograph now. What's that? Asked Benjamin. Just a boy, said Charlie, and yet he had the suspicion that this wasn't just any boy. Benjamin leaned over Charlie's arm and read, Manfred Bloor, age 17, was rescued from a fire at Bloor's Academy yesterday. Manfred said he was lucky to be alive. No, he didn't, Charlie said breathlessly. What do you mean he didn't? Asked Benjamin. He didn't say that, Charlie murmured, and he suddenly sat on the ground with his back to the wall. He held the paper at arm's length, dismayed by the words that were creeping out of the picture. Someone's going to pay for this. How'd you, began Benjamin. Shut up, Benjamin, cried Charlie. I'm listening. What to? Shh. As Charlie stared at Manfred Bloor, he heard a lot of shouts, and then a woman's voice broke through the others. Are you accusing someone, Manfred? You're right, I am, said a husky voice. Why do you think it wasn't an accident? The husky voice again. I'm not stupid, that's why. A man said, the fire department told us a candle was probably blown over. Don't you believe this? Enough! Whoever said this had such a deep and chilling voice, Charlie dropped the paper. It whirled away and flopped into the gutter. Charlie, what's going on? Asked Benjamin. Charlie gave a deep sigh. I'm hearing voices, he said. Oh no, Benjamin sat beside him, and Runnerbean crouched beside Benjamin. What sort of voices? Benjamin never said that's garbage. He took life seriously, which wasn't always a bad thing. Charlie told Benjamin about the photograph of Runnerbean that had gotten mixed up with the man and a baby. It was going to be a surprise birthday card for you, said Charlie, and now it won't be. I'm sorry. Doesn't matter, said Benjamin. Go on about the photograph. Charlie explained that he had heard voices when he looked at the man and the baby. He'd even heard that the baby cry and maybe a cat purring. Weird, Benjamin breathed. I made myself believe I just imagined it, said Charlie, but when I saw the newspaper, it happened again. I could hear reporters talking to that boy on the front page. I could hear his voice, too. He sounded kind of mean and sly. And then someone said, enough! And that was the worst voice I'd ever heard in my whole life. Benjamin shivered, and Runnerbean whined in sympathy. The boys sat side by side on the damp pavement, not knowing quite what to do. The wind flung leaves at them, and thunder rumbled in the distance. It began to rain. Runnerbean nudged Benjamin and whined. He hated getting wet. And then, during a particularly loud clap of thunder, a man appeared in front of the boys. He was wearing a dark raincoat, and his wet hair was plastered over his forehead in wide black bands. It's raining, the man announced. Had you not noticed? Charlie looked up. Uncle Peyton? He said in surprise. Uncle Peyton was Grandma Bone's brother. He was 20 years younger than she was, and they didn't get along. Peyton led a secret life, even eating apart from the others. He never went outside in daylight. You're wanted at home, Uncle Peyton told Charlie. Charlie and Benjamin stood up and shook their cramped legs. This was the third unusual thing to happen today. It wasn't nearly dark enough for Uncle Peyton to venture out. Charlie wondered what could possibly have happened to cause such a drastic action. So that's the end of chapter 1. And again, I want you at this time, hopefully if you have an illustration or a picture, I'd love to see it if you take a picture of it. And if you're from my room, you can put it onto our Class Dojo or Google Classroom. If not, you can just share your picture with someone in your family, tell them what you were listening to. And I want you to try to think of those questions that I had asked about before we started, which was these questions right here. And again, you can just write these answers down on a piece of paper. You can type them in the comments if you're able to, or just tell someone verbally your answers. So the first question, what are some of Charlie's character traits? So we want to think about his thoughts and actions in the chapter. I remember how much he thought about his best friend's birthday card and how much work he was going to put into it and how he felt bad that it didn't work out. I also remember that he was really trying to please both his mom and grandmother, Maisie, and then he was also trying to please his grandma Jones at the same time. So this does tell me about him. Another thing you can do is compare the two grandmothers. So they're kind of funny. They kind of go back and forth fighting and arguing with each other. So I want you to think about Charlie's two grandmothers, Grandma Bone and Maisie, and think about how they are alike and how they are different. I hope you enjoyed chapter 1. I'll be back with chapter 2 in a day or so. Stay well.